Does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Engel of New York. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this act may be used by the Department of Homeland Security to lease or purchase new light-duty vehicles for any executive fleet or for any agency's fleet inventory, except in accordance with Presidential Memorandum Federal Fleet Performance dated May 24, 2011.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairman, on May 24, 2011, President Obama issued a memorandum on federal fleet performance that requires all new light-duty vehicles in the federal fleet to be alternate fuel vehicles, such as hybrid, electric, natural gas, or biofuel by December 31, 2015. My amendment echoes the presidential memorandum by prohibiting funds in the Homeland Security Appropriations Act from being used to lease or purchase new light-duty vehicles, except in accord with the president's memorandum. I've introduced a similar amendment to 9 different appropriations bills in the past 2 years, and each time it was accepted and passed by voice vote. Our transportation sector is by far the biggest reason we send $600 billion per year to hostile nations to pay for oil at ever-increasing costs. But America does not need to be dependent on foreign sources of oil for transportation fuel. Alternative technologies exist today that will allow any alternative fuel to be used in America's automotive fleet. The federal government operates the largest fleet of light-duty vehicles in America. According to the GSA, there are over 660,000 vehicles in the federal fleet, with almost 55,000 being used by the Department of Homeland Security. By supporting a diverse array of vehicle technologies in our federal fleet, we will encourage development of domestic energy resources, including biomass, natural gas, agricultural waste, hydrogen, and renewable electricity. Expanding the role these energy sources play in our transportation economy will help break the leverage over Americans held by foreign government-controlled oil companies, will increase our nation's domestic security, protect consumers from price spikes and shortages in the world oil markets. So I ask that my colleagues support the Engel Amendment. And on a similar note, I will soon be introducing the Open Fuels Act, which is similar to this, with our colleague, the gentlewoman from Florida, Ileana Ross-Layton. And our bill would require 30% of new automobiles in 2015 and 50% in 2016 and every subsequent year to be able to be operated on non-petroleum fuels in addition to or instead of petroleum-based fuels. And it would cost $100 or less per car manufactured in America to do this. Possibilities include the full array of existing technologies, including flex fuel, natural gas, hydrogen, biodiesel, plug-in electric drive, fuel cell, ethanol and methanol, and a catch-all for new technologies. I remember going into a gasoline station in Brazil. I believe the chairwoman was with me at the time, and we noticed that there were all kinds of alternatives available to Brazilian consumers that were not available to American consumers. And it just seems to me that we ought to not only catch up but pull ahead and have that same kind of technology available to Americans. So I encourage my colleagues to support this amendment and the Open Fuels Act as we work toward breaking our dependence on foreign oil, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New York yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
To strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairman, we support this amendment, and I'll yield time to my colleague, Mr. Price.
Thank the chairman for yielding.
The gentleman from is recognized for the remainder of the time of the gentleman from Texas.
I thank the chairman for yielding and simply want to also express my support for the amendment. I hope the colleagues will support it.
Yield back.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New York. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report.
Amendment offered by Mr. King of Iowa. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following. Section A. None of the funds made available in this act may be used to finalize, implement, administer, or enforce the documents described in subsection B. B. For purposes of this section, the documents described in this subsection are the following. 1. Policy number
Madam Chair,
10072.1.
I ask the amendment be considered as read. Unanimous consent. Madam Chair, I ask unanimous consent the amendment be considered as read.
Is there objection?
Madam Chair, I object. I think we want to hear this entire amendment.
The clerk will report.
10072.1, published on March 2, 2011. 2. Policy number 10075.1, published on June 17, 2011. 3. Policy number 10076.1, published on June 17, 2011. 4. The memorandum of November 17, 2011, from the Principal Legal Advisor of United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement pertaining to case-by-case review of incoming and certain pending cases. 5. The memorandum of June 15, 2012, from the Secretary of Homeland Security pertaining to exercising prosecutorial discretion with respect to individuals who came to the United States as children. 6. The memorandum of December 21, 2012, from the Director of United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement pertaining to civil immigration enforcement, guidance on the use of detainers in the federal, state, local, and tribal criminal justice systems.
The gentleman from Iowa is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is an amendment that I offered last year that succeeded here on the floor by a vote of 238 to 175 in a bipartisan fashion. It's the amendment that simply says none of the funds made available in this Act may be used to finalize, implement, administer, or enforce the documents described, which are known as the Morton Amendments. The Morton Amendments are the Morton language, the Morton memos, excuse me, are essentially executive edicts that flowed from the White House, that are flowed also from the Director of Homeland Security, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano, down through John Morton, who is the Director of ICE. And they seek to implement an administrative amnesty policy. There are 6 of these memos, and the one that we're most familiar with is the memo that grants what's known, generally speaking, as DREAM Act Light, which gives I'll say a legal status, if you accept the authority of the President to suspend immigration law, to those who fit 4 different classes of people. Now, 4 classes of people granted administrative amnesty if they claim to have come to the United States under the age of 16, if they've been here over 5 years, if they have received a high school or a GED degree, or been honorably discharged from the military. And in the memo, particularly the one who is the DREAM Act Light memo, dated June 15th of 2012, 7 times they mention the prosecutorial discretion on an individual basis. Well, this sets up 4 classes of people. It has been the subject of litigation. The litigation that's gone to a federal court in Texas is the case of Crane versus Napolitano. Chris Crane is the president of the ICE union. They made 10 points to the unconstitutionality of these memos, which direct ICE sometimes to break the very immigration law that they pledged to uphold. And so I have in my hand the decision that came down from that district in Texas, and it's a northern district of Texas, and of the 10 points made in this case, the judge upheld 9 of them in the favor of the Constitution and the rule of law. The 10th one he sent back to them and said, the government hasn't given us a clear enough argument, rewrite that and I'll give you another decision on it. I expect that all 10 are likely to be found in the favor of the Constitution and the rule of law. The point here is, Madam Chair, the President does not have the authority to waive immigration law, nor does he have the authority to create it out of thin air, and he's done both with these Morton memos. In this respect, they do have prosecutorial discretion. I concede that point. But the President, nor do any of his agents through the executive branch of government, have the authority to create classes of people and waive the enforcement of immigration law for classes of people, and then on top of that create a work permit out of thin air. That's just a couple of these memos, of these 6 memos that are there altogether. And we should remember that the memo dated November 17, 2011, includes 475,000 people who had already been adjudicated for deportation, and the President, through his agents and the executive branch, have ordered that the people that have been adjudicated for deportation on those lists should have the law waived, and they should stay in the United States, even though the law requires that they've already been adjudicated for deportation. 300,000 of the 475,000 have already been granted an administrative legal presence. This Congress has the full authority to establish immigration law. The President takes an oath of office to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And every single document that provides lawful presence in the United States of America, aside from a naturally born American citizen, is a product of this Congress, not a product of the pen of the President or the people whom he appoints. And so this is an amendment that prohibits the resources from being used to enforce the Morton memos, and it conforms with the Founding Fathers' vision, and it conforms with the Constitution in that the President cannot defy his own oath of office. He can't defy the Constitution. The President can't take on Article I authority and legislate by executive order or edict or press conference. That's the job of this Congress. That's why we are Article I. He is Article II. And whatever people think of the impending immigration policy here in the United States, we cannot allow the executive branch to usurp the legislative authority of the United States Congress. And if we allow that to happen in immigration, it could happen to anything. So I urge the adoption of my amendment, and I would yield back the negative balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The question is on the amendment.
Madam Chairman,
The gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition.
I rise in opposition to the amendment.
Is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chairman, I rise with great disappointment, and I think sadness is the right word. This is an amendment that I very much hoped would not be offered tonight. I know that many in this chamber hoped it would not be offered tonight. It's a poison pill amendment. That's a term I've not used tonight, and that's a term I don't use lightly. I very much hope this amendment would not be offered, and I hope now that it's been offered that it is not fated to pass. We've worked for months cooperatively on this Homeland Security Appropriations Bill. As I said in announcing bipartisan support for this bill at the beginning of today's debate, I commended the chairman heartily and the staff and members who have worked so hard on this in a bipartisan fashion, trying to come together. We gave a little, we took a little. But we did understand that it was important for this institution and for our nation's security to come together on a Homeland Security bill that most members of this chamber could support. And for that reason, most divisive issues, most extraneous issues that have the capacity to divide us and, in fact, to destroy that bipartisan support, most of those have been conscientiously avoided. And that has included, until this moment, the offering of amendments on this floor. The gentleman describes this as an amendment he offered last year. Yes, it's an amendment he offered last year, and it's an amendment that blew up bipartisan support for this bill last year. And it's an amendment, by the way, with one very toxic addition from last year, twisting the knife, so to speak, adding the DREAM Act children to the bill's provisions. Unbelievable that would be added in this version of the bill. Let me just say that what the King Amendment would prohibit is what every law enforcement agency in this country must do and does with regularity, making the most effective use of limited resources. No law enforcement agency in the land can go after every violation. Each law enforcement agency must prioritize the resources and go after the ones who would do us the most harm. Can we imagine that the Department of Homeland Security would not do that? In fact, we would rightly condemn them if they did not do that. One of the documents that the King Amendment would require Immigration and Customs Enforcement to ignore states, and I'm quoting, aliens who pose a danger to national security or a risk to public safety are priority one for removal. That's what the gentleman wants the agency to ignore. In a world with limited resources, it's dangerous, it's irresponsible, it's totally unrealistic not to prioritize the detention and the deportation of people who pose a threat to public safety and national security. And to do it in a demagogic fashion, saying if you prioritize criminals, if you prioritize dangerous people, then, well, you must be giving amnesty to everyone else. It's absurd. It's absurd. It may have a certain appeal on the talk shows, but it is unworthy of this body. Why would we want ICE to spend as much time and energy going after innocent kids in college who were brought to this country by their parents as it spends going after known dangerous criminals? Why would we want ICE to focus on the detention and the deportation of the spouses of U.S. citizens serving in our military rather than on people who pose a threat to national security? Colleagues know there is no answer to these questions that doesn't point in the direction of a resounding rejection of this extreme and destructive amendment. And I beg my colleagues to vote no. And I yield back.
The gentleman from North Carolina yields back.
Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
To strike the last word.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I have a number of good friends on the floor, Madam Chair. My good friend Mr. King serves with me on the Judiciary Committee. Good friend Mr. Price, who is the ranking member, has just given an eloquent expose of the contents of Mr. King's amendment. And I've worked with Judge Carter, Congressman Carter, Chairman Carter, as we look to ensuring the security of the border and protecting the homeland. I think it is important, first of all, that we should thank ICE officers across America, because most ICE officers, in spite of the judicial decision that Mr. King offers, have followed the executive order or the directions of their director, Mr. Morton, who is an established public servant and law enforcement officer. His credentials are without question. The Judiciary Committee has heard from Mr. Morton on several occasions to articulate the premise of the provisions that are being attacked in this amendment. Each time he has been able to document the value of what this prosecutorial discretion series of orders represents. In fact, Mr. Morton went out on the road. He came to Houston, Texas, and met at our Immigration Services office to explain to an array of community persons what this actually meant. There was no offering of amnesty. There was no utilization of that language. There was no suggestion that this would be an open-door policy. This was a suggestion that thoughtful ICE agents, law enforcement officers entrusted to uphold the law, would have the authority to use prosecutorial discretion so that, as my colleague from North Carolina said, we would go after the terrorists, go after those who are here to do us harm, but allow hardworking families to stay together. My good friend in his remarks from Iowa does not make mention of the fact that the Obama administration has deported more individuals than any administration preceding him. Many of us have advocated against that. But what we did advocate for is a fair assessment of how you make that determination. Now, maybe my good friend and the friends on the floor are not aware that we're under sequester, that we're operating under a budget line that is not even $1 trillion, $970+ billion, way below what I'd like to see to fund this government that we have. If that is the question, then why would my good friend, Mr. King, suggest that we are not doing our job? So we want to split up hardworking families and fathers who are supporting their families but may be an overstay or came in undocumented. But most of all, the pain of the eons and eons of young people that have come into my office that are in the academic institutions of Texas or Houston who want to stay here and contribute to America's dream, the dream children, and we're now telling them after receiving a prosecutorial deferral, using prosecutorial discretion, case by case, determining that there's no credible criminal background, nothing they've done wrong. And by that decision, that simple, even-handed decision, that nothing has been done wrong by them, they're allowed to stay. I just want to know if my friend will support me on comprehensive immigration reform. Then we'll be able to get it fixed. And maybe he'll answer that. But I would ask my colleagues to please look at this as a law enforcement tool. This is not willy-nilly. This has been a thoughtful process that ICE has articulated for its agents throughout the country for them to thoughtfully look at those individuals that would pose a danger, deport them. But to those families who need to be united, who are surviving and working and supporting 5 children and 4 children and going to work and going to houses of worship, or those children that are in the sophomore year or the 3rd year or graduating or graduate school, or the mother who came and fell on the ground in my office prostrate, crying, when it was acknowledged that her graduate school daughter could stay here and finish her degree to no fault of her own, had come here to the United States not knowing that she was unstatused. So I'm hoping, like Mr. Price, that we will not have a divisive amendment, and I am praying that my good friend will join me on comprehensive immigration reform, Madam Chair, as I yield back, and that he will withdraw this amendment.
Time has
I yield back.
expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 5 minutes.
I yield the balance of my time to Mr. King.
I thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania for yielding, and I appreciate the opportunity to respond to some of the statements that were made here, Madam Chair, and I'll just go through some of the things that I heard from the gentleman, that this amendment is a poison pill, that it's very toxic, that it's twisting the knife, that it's unbelievable, that it's a demagogic fashion, that it's talk show appeal. I would point out to the body that none of that has any substance. And the real substance of this is this, that we all stood here on the floor of this House of Representatives and raised our hand and took an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America. We saw that happen today with the new member right down here. I take that seriously. I bring my Bible in, and I swear on that Bible. And I carry a Constitution in my jacket pocket every single day. And I read it many of those days. But I adhere to that as we all take the oath to do so. And if we have members of this Congress that don't know the difference between Article 1 and Article 2, or members of this Congress that conflate Article 1 and Article 2, or members of this Congress that can somehow excuse a president who has crossed a line that he has himself drawn, not just with his oath of office that I referenced earlier, but with a statement to the high school not very far outside of where we are right now on March 28th, 2011, when he said, "I know you want me to pass the DREAM Act by executive order, but I don't have the authority to do that. That's Congress's authority. I am the president. Congress writes the laws, the executive branch enforces the laws, and the judiciary branch rules on the language and the constitutionality of it." The president was right. He's a former adjunct professor of constitutional law at the University of Chicago, and even though I disagree with him quite often, that time he was right. But about a year later, he issued this order that is DREAM Act Light, that is an executive act that defied his own definition of the limitations of Article 2, the executive branch, and he assumed the powers and authority of Article 1, the legislative branch. Now, how can we take an oath to uphold this Constitution and excuse that kind of behavior? Because whether or not we approve of the policy, let's have the debate on the policy here, where it belongs. Let's not hand this over to a president who has usurped constitutional authority. Our founding fathers envisioned this tension, this conflict, but they never envisioned that a United States Congress, the legislative branch, House or Senate, would allow the president to usurp our constitutional authority. They envisioned that we would, each body would aggressively defend the authority that we have within the Constitution. This amendment that I have simply says we're not going to use taxpayers' dollars to defend this unconstitutional act on the part of the President of the United States. I've taken all the due diligence I can. I called a meeting, we initiated the litigation, we're moving it through the court system, but we can never catch up through the litigation process the things that the President has usurped that are the legislative authority that we have. That's the question that is here. Whatever your position is on the DREAM Act Light and the Morton memos and all of the things that seem to be coming out of the gangs of 8 in the House or the Senate, we have an oath to uphold the Constitution. That's the vote here, Madam Chair, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose is it from Illinois? The gentleman from Pennsylvania yield back.
I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition? The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
First of all, this has nothing to do with the Constitution of the United States. The fact is that the Congress of the United States has passed laws granting the President of the United States this executive authority. He has it by statute and by law. As a matter of fact, many of you might remember that in 1999, Congressman Lamar Smith and others wrote to then President Clinton asking him to use his discretionary power more often. In other words, I'm sorry to say to the gentleman, Mr. King, but I think the gentleman from Texas is an authority on this issue, as he has chaired the Judiciary Committee. And the gentleman from Texas knows best, and he signed that letter, and it was bipartisan. So this has nothing to do with the Constitution of the United States. Let's not kid ourselves. Now, if we want to deal fundamentally with if this is good or bad, we can deal with that also. The fact is that this House passed the DREAM Act 216 to 208. That is a fact that in the fall of 2010. And that 55 senators stood up for the DREAM Act in the Senate. The fact is that a majority of senators have already voted in favor of it, and a majority of the members of this House. Now, what I don't find in the Constitution that says that a majority of senators shouldn't prevail. We all know that. It should be just simply 51 out of 100, but that's not the way the Senate works. But that's not in the Constitution of the United States. So what the President is really doing in this executive order is allowing. And I just want people to understand that we're also here for justice and for fairness. And it is only fair and just that young men and women who are no different than my daughters, than your daughters, they are just as American as they are. They speak this language. This is the country that they love. It is the only country that they know. And we're waiting for the paperwork to catch up to those Americans. That's what they are. And they came out by the hundreds of thousands. Hundreds of thousands. In Chicago, there was 12,000 in line. They came up with their moms and their dads, and they were crying for joy because they had an opportunity to go to school, to become educated, and to contribute back to this nation. Children. We should not hold children responsible for the actions of adults and of their parents. We should give them an opportunity, and that is what this executive order has done. They go to school with your children. They sit down in the same churches with you and pray on Sunday. They play in the same playgrounds. They're an integral part of the communities in which we live. And in America, when they hear them speak, they hear the voices of young Americans. And one day, we will pass the DREAM Act, and we will not need an executive order. Things are getting better, Mr. King, here. November 6th, everybody said, stop picking winners and losers. Let's fix this immigration issue. And Republicans and Democrats are working together to come to find a solution. Now is not the time to divide this House and the Senate when it is looking. We can't talk decently about Benghazi or the IRS or anything, Obamacare or the budget or guns, but there is one thing that, when you have a vice presidential candidate, our colleague Paul Ryan, come to Chicago and speak, when you have a Congressman Carter come to San Antonio with me and speak, things are changing. Let's respect that. Let's respect the love and the intensity of caring about fixing our broken immigration system that has been expressed. I was so delighted, I want to share it to the gentleman from Iowa, when your majority leader, Mr. Cantor, gave a speech and said, I'm not only for the DREAM Act, I'm for a pathway to citizenship for the Dreamers. I said, great. I didn't question his motives. I said, great. How can I help you? Let's help him, the majority leaders, and other Democrats and Republicans alike who have said, you know what? Let's fix our broken immigration system. We're tired of it dividing families. I want to say, I've had them come into my office, American citizen soldiers, going and fighting on the front line so that you have the right to speak here and protect it. And they have their wives being deported. We should have discretion so their wives aren't deported. That's only fair and right. 4 million American citizen children. Mr. King, 4 million American citizen children have undocumented parents. We should not separate them. We should have discretion to keep those families together. Let's defeat this motion. It has no place in the House of Representatives.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Mexico seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, I know everyone's tired, and I just finished getting off the floor offering an amendment and a colloquy with my colleague, the dear Chairman, Mr. Carter, as well. And I went back to my small place to make a sandwich, and I saw this amendment come on the floor. And I had to hurry back. Everyone's tired because it's so late, Madam Chair. Here we are, it's midnight. Under the dark of night, here we have an amendment that I hope the talk shows are paying attention and watching tonight. And I hope that dreamers across America are watching their televisions, because if not, they're going to be reading about this in the morning. At a time when, as Congressman Gutierrez described, that we're coming together as a Congress and as a nation to try to get comprehensive immigration reform adopted, at a time when we should be concentrating our efforts on going after those criminals that are doing bad things, when the Chamber of Commerce of the United States and faith-based organizations, churches across America on Sundays and Saturdays and even on Bible study on Wednesdays are talking about the importance of respecting our friends and our neighbors, especially those young people, these dreamers, these young men and women that serve in our military who are undocumented here in the United States, to look after them and to pray for them and encourage the Congress to come together. This amendment is a slap in their face, Madam Chair. The King Amendment would make communities less safe by discouraging crime victims from coming forward to police. The Morton Memo on Victims and Witnesses encourages the agency not to initiate removal proceedings against an immediate victim or witness to a crime. This is needed to ensure that victims of domestic violence and other crimes come forward to seek protection. It is needed to help effective prosecutions of criminals. The memo supports the U visa and the Violence Against Women Act self-petition process that came under fire during the recent Violence Against Women debate, notwithstanding the strong law enforcement support for both of these important protections. Let me see if I can make that simpler. An undocumented woman who's here in the United States that's a victim of rape, that comes forward to say who raped her, that goes before the law enforcement without the memos in place and these protections potentially, she's to be detained and deported because she was raped and she came forward with the courage to be able to try to get that individual that perpetrated that crime. It's sad, Madam Chair, that here we are yet again, that at a time when Democrats and Republicans have come together to be able to advocate for the importance of taking care of our dreamers, when this passed this House and so many of our senators came forward, when the leaders of our respective parties in this very House of Representatives that we're honored to be a part of have come together and advocated for this change. We're having this debate after midnight here in Washington, D.C. tonight. It's sad. And the Moore memos are hardly new. Prosecutional discretion memos in the immigration context have existed since 1976. Congressman Gutierrez eloquently described the letters that were sent by Congressman Hyde and Congressman Lamar Smith asking for the executive to use this discretionary authority. Madam Chair, it's a sad, sad day that we're here tonight under the dark of night, where I hope dreamers across America are paying attention, because we need them tomorrow to light up those phones and make sure that they're talking to their friends, to their families, to their deacons, to their priests, to their faith-based leaders, and ask them to please stand up and encourage members of Congress, when this comes up for a vote tomorrow morning, to call members of Congress and tell them to reject this amendment. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time is expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise?
To strike the last word.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I would just like to point out that I do specifically challenge the gentleman from Iowa's claim that the President's deferred action program is unconstitutional. The Supreme Court did rule in Arizona versus the United States that the federal government, under the Supremacy Clause, does have the authority to set immigration policy over and above that of any state. Inherent in the authority to enforce immigration laws is the right and to be able to prioritize how that policy will be prioritized and how that policy will be executed. Now, the fact is that the executive branch has the authority, has the right to decide that they will take action on some cases and will take action on others in a prioritized fashion, and that is the very heart and soul of what DACA represents. So for the gentleman to argue that there's some constitutional infirmity with deferred action is wrong. He's wrong on the law. He's wrong on his constitutional argument. And quite frankly, I won't yield. And the fact is that it's important for the people of the United States to hear that these specious, weak arguments about lack of constitutionality are incorrect. And I would defer to yield the balance of my time to Mr. Gutierrez.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
From Minnesota will remain standing. The gentleman from Illinois has the floor and has the balance of the time.
I thank you. I just want to make clear something about DACA. I filled out many applications, as I know my colleague from Minnesota has. They pay a fee. They go through an extensive background check. They have to give up their fingerprints and go through an extensive background check if they find they're denied DACA. So don't think it's just show up. Now they're given a work permit for 2 years, and they get to work with that work permit. They don't have any right to health care or to any means-tested program, nothing, but the right to work and not to be deported from the United States of America. And they're contributing to this country already. So I just want to make that clear. Why would we want to spend the money of the federal government chasing down and hunting down and deporting people who came here as children who do not even know the countries that they came from? Again, I want to reiterate, they are American and everything but a piece of paper. And the Congress of the United States should be working to try to see how it is we bring them in and integrate them more fully. I want to express to the gentleman from Iowa something very, very clearly. I want to use every dollar and every resource to go after every gangbanger, every drug dealer, every person that is a criminal doing harm in the United States. But these are children who are doing no one harm. They came as children. They are innocent and should be treated as such. We want to prioritize our enforcement. We want to prioritize our enforcement so that we go after people who will do American citizens ill. They don't. They're children. They're wonderful young people. And I would suggest to everybody here, meet one, talk to one. And what you're going to see is the same values that you inculcate in your own children are the values that have been invested in these young men and women. We should give them a chance. Many of them are being denied as they go through the process. But it is a process that says we should use prosecutorial discretion. It is long. Everybody in this body knows, and you don't have to be a student of the Constitution of the United States to know that the President has plenary powers to pardon anybody at any time for any reason. Just ask Gerald Ford about Richard Nixon. That is a fact. And the President of the United States, in this case, is taking innocent young men and women who have been thoroughly checked in their background and said, you know what? I want to go after the mean, ugly people who want to do us harm. And I want to set aside these young men and women. We voted for it, 216 to 208. It was a proud day in the Congress of the United States. And I just want to say one more time to the gentleman from Iowa, there are members of your side of the aisle who I know are going to continue to work with us.
Would the gentleman yield?
Who are going to continue to work with us in this Congress of the United States to get this finished. Please let us do that work.
The time of the gentleman from Minnesota has expired. Members are reminded to address their comments to the chair. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Iowa. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
Madam Chair,
the amendment is not agreed to.
Ask a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Iowa will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will read.
Amendment offered by Mr. Ellison of Minnesota. At the end of the bill before the short title, insert the following. Section. None of the funds made available in this act may be used in contravention of any of the following. 1. The 5th and 14th Amendments to the Constitution of the United States. 2. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, relating to non-discrimination in federally assisted programs. 3. Section 809C1 of the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968, relating to prohibition of discrimination. 4. Section 210401A of the Violent Crime...
For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to have the amendment considered as read.
Is there objection? Without objection. The reading is suspended and the amendment is considered read. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, before the body is a simple amendment. We have 4 separate caucuses, members of this body, the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the Congressional Black Caucus, Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and the Congressional Asian and Pacific Islander Caucus join together to support a simple amendment to this important legislation. Now, Madam Speaker, it's important to point out that the hardworking staff and employees of DHS deserve respect and honor. They keep our country safe. We appreciate that. We appreciate all law enforcement, especially when they put their lives on the line for our safety. No one questions the public service and the professionalism demonstrated by security officials every day. However, occasionally reports of racial and ethnic and religious profiling do occur. And we see them in the news and we hear about them from civil liberties organizations. And too many Americans who are simply going about their business have been discriminated against solely because of race, color, ethnicity. This is wrong, and it's well rooted in our society that this is not an acceptable value or practice, and it's not what America is all about. This amendment we're offering today would simply help to put an end to it. Our amendment, straightforward, simply cites the Constitution and existing anti-discrimination laws to affirm that no funds made available by this law can be used to engage in racial, ethnic, or religious profiling. This is not a controversial amendment, nor is it partisan. In fact, it was former Bush administration official who said that religious and ethnic and racial stereotyping is not good policing. Now, we simply ask that this amendment receive the support of the body and that we again affirm our nation believes in equality under the law and that it is behavior that should inform law enforcement decisions, not simply identity. Now yield back and ask for a yes vote.
The gentleman from Minnesota yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Strike the last word.
For 5 minutes. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
We accept this amendment. I yield the balance of my time to my colleague, Mr. Price.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I also urge acceptance of the amendment. I yield back.
Yield back.
Gentleman from Texas yields back. Questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Minnesota. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report.
Amendment offered by Mrs. Blackburn of Tennessee. At the end of the bill, before the short title, add the following. Section. None of the funds made available by this act may be used for any activity by Transportation Security Administration transportation security officers outside an airport as defined in Section 47102 of Title 49 United States Code.
The gentlewoman from Tennessee is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As I have stated earlier during the floor debate, TSA transportation security officers are not federal law enforcement officers. They do not have any federal law enforcement training, nor are they eligible to receive federal law enforcement benefits. When Congress created the TSA in 2001, we defined TSA screeners in law as federal security screeners. Their role, as defined by the Aviation and Transportation Security Act, is to screen passengers and luggage at airports across the country. However, beginning in 2005, TSA administratively reclassified TSA security screeners as transportation security officers and began to upgrade their uniforms to reflect those of federal law enforcement officers with metal officer badges. Time magazine contributor Amanda Ripley succinctly summed up the transition by stating that TSA was, and I quote, outfitting frontline employees with new gold badges and royal blue shirts as part of a broader effort to improve their image and make people, to put it bluntly, hate them less, end quote. The problem is that TSA officers do not have any federal law enforcement training to reflect their officer title or appearance. Law enforcement personnel for air transportation security are clearly defined in Section 44903 of Title 49 U.S. Code. U.S. Code states that law enforcement means individuals who are authorized to carry and use firearms, vested with the power of arrest, and are identifiable by distinctive marks of authority. TSA officers do not meet this basic requirement of our law. Their training consists of 2 weeks in a classroom to learn how to screen passengers and bags, followed by 2 to 4 weeks of on-the-job training. That is why it is troubling to me and many of my constituents that TSA is allowed with their officers to take part in DHS Viper team operations outside of airports. These operations are currently taking place on our nation's highways, rail stations, ferry terminals, bus stations, and other mass transit facilities across the country. Adopting this amendment would end this practice. The American public should be outraged that our national security strategy to prevent a horrific attack at a mass transit facility includes randomly sending people with no federal law enforcement authority to randomly select and search citizens without any actionable intelligence. I strongly believe that Congress has an obligation to ensure that the title and appearance of federal employees properly reflects their training and background. There are already enough well-documented concerns questioning whether these individuals can even carry out the basic functions at the jobs within our airports. Here's an example. Last year, a TSA officer whistleblower in Nashville produced documents showing that TSA officers in charge of screening passengers' bags were receiving failing grades at being able to identify potential threats and were not receiving remedial training. Another example, a GAO report, which I have with me right here, published in January, shows that the TSA is failing to deploy passenger screening K-9 teams to airports and terminals with the highest risk as determined by the agency's high-risk list. Furthermore, the report lays out concerns that the current protocols in place are not appropriate for a suicide bombing attempt requiring an immediate law enforcement response. And if that's not concerning enough, there is a DHS Office of the Inspector General report released just last month on TSA's behavior detection officers, and Mr. Thompson of Mississippi referenced this earlier, which only consists of TSA's transportation officers and the behavior detection officers, and it raised concerns about their performance. TSA senior airport officials at airports contacted raised concerns regarding the selection, allocation, and the performance of the BDOs. TSA does not use an evaluation period to determine whether the new BDOs can effectively perform behavior detection. For these reasons, we should end this program and restrict them to the airports.
The
I yield
gentleman's
back.
time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise in opposition reluctantly to the gentlewoman's amendment. This is very similar to the amendment that was raised earlier this evening, and I expressed my opinion then, and I don't change my opinion. I have a great deal of concern about the issues that have been raised by my good friend from Tennessee, in fact from Williamson County, Tennessee, and I'm from Williamson County, Texas. We are going to, and I'm going to recommend to my ranking member that we look into these allegations of misuse of law enforcement or the presumption of law enforcement. We're going to talk to Mr. Pistol, we're going to talk about this too, try to get to the bottom of this stuff, but I don't think what the gentlelady is trying to accomplish with this amendment is appropriate at this time without us holding hearings and discussing some of these issues and trying to examine the statutes and make sure that they're operating within the statutes. And so for that reason, I think this is not the time, and I'm going to have to oppose this amendment, and I'll yield the balance of my time to my colleague, Mr. Price.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank the chairman for yielding. I would echo his sentiments on this amendment. I understand that it's well-intentioned and there may very well be some specific issues that demand attention, but this is largely the same amendment that we debated earlier this evening, voted down by a considerable margin, and I believe we should do that again. I yield back.
I yield back.
The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Tennessee. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not agreed to.
Madam Chairman, I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Tennessee will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report.
Amendment offered by Mr. Barletta of Pennsylvania. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following. Section. none of the funds made available under the heading Departmental Management and Operations, Departmental Operations, Office of the Secretary and Executive Management may be used for official reception and representational expenses until the Secretary of Homeland Security complies with Section 7208 of the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004, 8 U.S.C. 1365b.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My amendment is simple. The amendment would say that none of the funds from the Office of the Secretary may be used for official reception expenses until the Secretary of Homeland Security fully implements the biometric entry and exit data system. A biometric exit system is already required by the law. In 2004, Congress mandated the establishment of this system to track foreigners leaving our country. The 9/11 Commission recommended creating a biometric exit system as well. The creation of an effective exit system would keep our country safe because we would have a more effective way of tracking people who may pose a risk to our national security. Oftentimes, people speak of the illegal immigration issue as involving the northern, southern, and coastal borders. But as Boston showed us plainly, it involves much more than that. Nearly half of the illegal immigrants currently in the United States did not cross a traditional border. Rather, they arrived here on a legitimate visa, saw the visa expire, and never returned home. The truth is, if your state is home to an international airport, you effectively live in a border state. We know that 40% of illegal immigrants are visa overstays. But since we do not have an effective way of tracking who leaves our country, that number may be different. This amendment would withhold funds from the Secretary's reception expenses until the biometric exit system is fully implemented. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania yields back. The gentleman from, for what purpose does the gentleman from Texas?
Strike the last word.
The gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
We will accept this amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas yields back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Before I make a motion, Madam Chairman, I would like to thank all of the employees of the House for being willing to extend the time tonight so that we could get those members that have been waiting for 4 or 5 hours finished. I want to apologize for the inconvenience, but we appreciate the efficiency that allowed us. At this time, Madam Chairman, I move the committee do rise.
The question is on the motion that the committee rise. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the committee rises.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Speaker, the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union, having had under consideration 2217, directs me to report that it has come to no resolution thereon.
the Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union reports that the committee has had under consideration H.R. 2217 and has come to no resolution thereon.
Mr. Speaker,
Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Without objection. So,
thank you.
the Chair announces that the correct tally on the roll call under number 205 was 146 yeas and 290 nays. For the House, the following enrolled bill.
22, an act to amend the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to reauthorize user fee programs relating to new animal drugs and generic new animal drugs.
Yeah, we're fixing it now. Chris, I'm just...
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
I ask that the House do now adjourn.
Question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 9 a.m. today.
The House today began consideration of the 2014 Homeland Security Spending Bill. The bill totals $46 billion, including $6 billion for emergency disaster relief.